Today is Saturday, which means it's time for the bug catching contest. It's one of my personal favorites of the nostalgic second generation, where as you may already know, the player can compete with various NPCs to capture the best possible bug type Pokemon. Once the competition is over, the game makes its decision on the winner based on the rarity of the Pokemon, its level, its current HP, and even if it's shiny. But the best options are Pinsir and Cider, both practically assuring the first place. Although the latter could be even better than we thought, because also in the second generation we were introduced to a new evolution of Cider, Caesar, a stunning Pokemon of the new Steel type, so rare that it cannot be spotted on a single trainer in the game, excluding the Battle Tower. Having one in the team for the adventure is not really viable either, because to evolve it needs to hold a Metal Coat, an item that cannot be obtained until the captain of the SS Aqua gives it to the player mid-post game, at which point most people will already have their party complete. The same thing can be said for most of the Pokemon of the new Steel and Dark types. Quite impossible to get early in the region, and I really think that was a mistake of the games, because one thing is to keep hidden a good part of the new creatures to give them that touch of mystery and rumors that Game Freak was looking for. Another quite different thing is the new types being so inaccessible that the player barely gets to know their characteristics. But what if I tell you that there's a secret method to get a Caesar before Mortis Gym badge? On Route 38, to the west of Aquatic City, there are wild Magnemites in the tall grass, and in this generation, they have a 5% chance of carrying a Metal Coat. So if you catch a few, it won't take you long to farm this item and unlock a wonderful Pokemon for that really early point in the game. Sadly, we still need to have access to trade for it to evolve, unless we are talking about the remakes where back in the days you could combine this method with the GTS to have a brand new Caesar to beat up most of the trainers in the game. Speaking of that Metal Coat, it could be considered an interesting hidden item that not many people know can be obtained, and it's not the only one in the series. For example, have you ever been confronted with the dilemma of playing the Kanto games and wanting several Pokemon that evolve by Moonstone in your team, but you only find one in the Mount Moon, and you don't get the next one until much later in the adventure, so you are forced to choose between them. But not everybody knows that in that random rock of the same Mount Moon, you can find a second Moonstone to evolve some of the other Pokemon available at that early point and get a really monstrous team before the second batch. It could be said that Leaf Green and Fire Red represented the prime of hidden items, especially when it came to using them as Easter eggs and to tell small stories. For example, after helping Mr. Fuji in the Pokemon Tower, you can find the Sooth Bell at the spot where he was standing. It's said that its comforting chime calms the spirit of Pokemon, so it was surely Fuji who is devoted to take care of abandoned Pokemon who lost it during the incident. Giovanni's case is similar, but even more curious. This time, after defeating him in his gym, with the subsequent dissolution of Team Rocket and his disappearance, we can find the Macho brace in his spot. This item doubles all effort values gained during a battle, making Pokemon training a lot more efficient. But it's kinda curious that such a character would drop it, right? Supposedly, Giovanni has stayed from honorable training and was dedicated to amassing power through criminal acts, but perhaps the exception was his Pokemon team, which has always given me the impression of being very carefully trained and attached to him. It seems that he preserved some of the trainer's spirit in his heart. What if Giovanni left this item as a token of his gratitude before his departure? It's perfect for anyone who wants to become the best trainer, and perhaps he saw that potential in the player. if we had to choose one of the symbols that best represents the franchise, a good option could be, without a doubt, the Pokeball. It's a magical device that has sparked a lot of discussion in the community. How does it work? What are the best and worst Pokeball types? But a not so usual question that I find quite interesting is, which one is the rarest and most exclusive? Of course, the obvious answer is the Master Ball, the forbidden product of the Silph Company, created outside the law at the request of Team Rocket. It can ignore the level of respect and bonding necessary for a Pokemon to stay inside any Pokeball, catching its target no matter the circumstances, so it's quite against ethics if you think about it, so it's not a surprise that it was never mass-produced or commercialized. And the few copies that were originally created were handed out to eminent and influential figures in the Pokemon world, who could then give one to the player through the generations. It seems that another portion of them went into the hands of private companies, which could put them as the first prize in raffles and lotteries, and also a handful of scientific groups could manage to develop their own prototypes, such as Colress, who gives the player a second Master Ball in Black and White too. From all this, we can see that, although restricted, the Silph Company created some stock at the time, and there are quite a few units in circulation. But what if I tell you that there's a model of Pokeball that is just as rare and exclusive in the generation in which it was introduced? I'm talking about the Luxury Ball. Did you know that in Ruby and Sapphire, the games in which it was introduced and consequently its original idea, only one single unit could be found in one of the locked underwater rooms of the abandoned ship, as it was in this all-luxurious passenger ship on the most exclusive floors where probably the wealthiest people used to travel. It's not hard to believe that it was someone very important who lost it during the accident. This is the only one we can find, but you can get another one in this generation by winning the Master Rank contests. When the player already has all the possible ribbons, the game gives instead the Luxury Ball as a reward, which, if you ask me, doesn't exactly make it less exclusive. In this universe, it could be an achievement reserved for the best coordinator of all time, further emphasizing how unique this item is around the world. In the same generation, the last method to get a Luxury Ball is outside Hoenn. In the Sebi island of Fire Red and Leaf Green, the spoiled Selphie, a lady from one of the richest families in the world, starts asking us to show her a specific species of Pokemon after rescuing her in Lost Cave, and this item is one of the possible rewards. It all gets even more mysterious when you realize how extremely situational this item is. Its catch rate is the same as a normal Pokeball, and its main feature is to make the Pokemon caught with it increase their friendship more quickly, maybe due to the luxury and comfort of its interior. The thing is, in other generations, friendship has a bit more relevance, meaning it could be quite useful, but in Hoenn, the only Pokemon that evolves by friendship is a Golbat, so the only real practical use of the Luxury Ball would be to catch a Zubat or Golbat to evolve it more easily. At least its colors match with shiny Rayquazas, so catching one with the Luxury Ball is a pretty epic challenge considering that its ratio is awful and it's gonna cost you a lifetime to get each unit without being able to reset because, well, you'd lose the shiny. But why? Why did they decide to make this item so draconiously scarce if they weren't even going to give it an interesting purpose? Well, it's actually quite simple. It was meant to represent just that. Ostentation, that is, conspicuous consumption, looking to buy goods only for their higher price when the real utility value is practically zero. So, in terms of effectiveness, the Master Ball is still our king. And in the original first generation, we can read between the lines that Giovanni's obsession with this item comes from the fact that he saw in it the last hope to have his control over Mewtwo back. Hero or villain, the indisputable fact is that if if successful, Giovanni would have been unstoppable, as it was without a doubt the strongest Pokémon in the world. No other, not even Mew, was close to Mewtwo in the first generation. But later on, even after the first generation, several official sources have been still referring to Mewtwo as the most powerful Pokémon in existence, which seems bold when over the years forces of nature and essential beings have been introduced, and at least in terms of in-game stats, they clearly surpass it, right? What if I told you that Mewtwo, 28 years and 9 generations later, is still the most statistically powerful Pokémon ever? Or something close to that? Well, the original Mewtwo was created in games where special defense and attack were one and the same. That means that originally had 154 points in both stats. And if we translate that original Mewtwo to the present day, that would make it the most powerful base form Pokémon by stats with 744 points, far outperforming Arceus in second place. I know it's a pretty tricky argument, but let's remember that when the franchise first mentioned Mewtwo as the most powerful Pokémon, it was referring to that Mewtwo. So it's pretty amazing that those statements have remained true after all this time on games. But if you want to add Mega Evolution and other special forms into the equation, Mewtwo X and Y are still second only to Eternamax Eternatus, who, let's remember, it can be used in battle in any way, so even in those circumstances, the genetic miracle Pokémon could still be number one when it comes to combat. Pokémon Colosseum, a highly acclaimed game among the fans of the franchise, as well as the first 3D game with the structure of the main line. But what if I tell you that its creators had nothing to do with Pokémon? Of course, Game Freak doesn't usually get involved in the development of spin-offs, leaving it to other studios, but I'm not talking about that. In an interview, Colosseum's lead programmer said, "I hadn't played any Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Pokémon games before we started. There actually wasn't a true Pokémon expert in the entire studio, but that didn't change our deadlines. Although most of the staff had worked on Dragon Quest and were experienced in the world of RPGs, it's shocking that Pokémon could hand over the most ambitious spin-off the series had ever launched to a studio so inexperienced in the field. But that wasn't a bad thing. That different take on the Pokémon world was a breath of fresh air. And speaking about that, in an interview of 2016 for the Spanish Nintendo official magazine, Masuda was asked something that many fans who have been around since the beginning of the series have been wondering. Is there a possibility that we will see a game in the style of Pokémon Stadium or Pokémon Colosseum? To which Masuda said no, and then he laughed. Reshiram and Zekrom, white and black, a demon that brings salvation and an angel that brings destruction, the darkness within light and the light within darkness, two contrary visions that, when combined, generate a chemical reaction capable of transcending into something that the game calls the original dragon, but we could also call it harmony, balance, or love. That's the driving force running through the story of the 5th generation, and that philosophy goes to unexpected lengths. For example, here's a detail that very few notice. The signature moves of both legendaries are Fusion Flare and Fusion Bolt. That fusion of their name is already something to think about, since these two Pokémon were one at some point. But something not widely known is the side effect of these moves, if one is used after the other. For example, if Reshiram uses Fusion Flare after a Fusion Bolt from Zekrom, the move will hit with no less than double the power, going to 100 to 200. The move also has a special animation when that bonus applies, precise, with a glow in the sky before hitting the target. If you consider the fact that N's legendary will always use the special move on turn 1, because they have been together for longer, so it has 2 more levels and it's faster, the player will always have the chance to use its own move in response, benefiting from this effect. It almost seems that the game encourages this situation as the canonical development of the battle, in which N understands the lesson we mentioned at the beginning. But even if we get that bonus, it's still not a very effective move against the other legendary, and the real potential of these attacks can only be achieved when both heroes fight side by side and use the move successively. Witnessing that would make something click on N, like a revelation that showed the character that true power is in unity and not division. A lesson that could deeply touch him, as it happened during the battle, without the need for words, to the extent of changing his worldview forever.